It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the hum of daily life feels steady and unshaken. I was halfway through organizing some paperwork when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made me pause for a moment. Helena. My mother-in-law. Hello. Her voice chimed, unusually cheerful, carrying an almost mischievous edge. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Helena always seemed brimming with energy, no matter the situation. A woman of perpetual enthusiasm, she had a knack for making everything, no matter how mundane, seem like an event. But there was something different about her tone that day. "Guess where I am?" she teased, giggling like a child who knew a secret they couldn't wait to spill. I sighed. I wasn't in the mood for her games, but I played along, hoping to cut the conversation short. "I don't know." "Where?" "At a travel agency," she exclaimed, her excitement bubbling through the phone. "I've been planning a trip to Hawaii with 20 of my closest relatives." I forced a smile, though she couldn't see it. "Oh, sounds fun," I replied, my voice flat, uninterested. Before I could find an excuse to hang up, she dropped a bombshell. "You're treating us to this trip, by the way," she added nonchalantly. I froze, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "What are you talking about?" Her next words sent a chill down my spine. "I borrowed the black card from your wallet, and I've memorized the PIN. I'll be using it now." My heart sank, disbelief flooding me. "Helena, that's not funny." "What do you mean you borrowed it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Her laughter echoed through the phone, sharp and confident. "Oh, darling, a daughter-in-law is just like an ATM, isn't she? If you object, divorce awaits," she joked, though there was a disturbing hint of seriousness in her tone. I stood there, stunned into silence. The line went dead shortly after, but the weight of her words lingered. My hands shook as I clutched the phone, replaying the conversation in my mind. That call, it wasn't just a moment of recklessness on her part. It was the beginning of something far darker, a thread that, when pulled, would unravel my life in ways I couldn't yet imagine. For weeks, a shadow had lingered over my marriage. Brant, once the picture of a devoted husband and father, had started changing in ways I couldn't ignore. He used to be the kind of man who took pride in folding laundry with me, fixing Tyler's bike on weekends, and tucking our son into bed every night. But lately, his presence in our home felt more like a ghost than a partner. At first, I chalked it up to stress. He had mentioned extra projects at work, claiming overtime was piling up. Yet, strangely, his paychecks never reflected the long hours he said he was putting in. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the gnawing in my gut told me otherwise. The distance between us grew like a widening canyon. He began staying out late, not just on weekdays but weekends, too. "It's work," he'd say, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. One evening, I suggested something that might bring us back together. "Why don't we take a family trip next week? Just the three of us, like old times." He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "Oh, I ran into an old classmate recently," he said, almost too quickly. "We're meeting up next weekend. It's just a guy, so don't worry about it." The way he emphasized "just a guy" sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. Why did he feel the need to clarify that? I tried to dismiss the feeling, telling myself I was overthinking. But his sudden excitement about reconnecting with this supposed friend felt oddly out of character. I nodded, not wanting to start an argument, but my instincts wouldn't let it go. Something was off. Brant wasn't the same man I married, and I needed to understand why. That night, I lay awake in bed while he slept soundly beside me. My thoughts churned, each one louder than the last. Was he lying? If so, what was he hiding? I decided I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Subtle changes in his behavior became clues I couldn't overlook. I began keeping track of his movements, noting when he left, when he returned, and any inconsistencies in his stories. My suspicions weren't just baseless paranoia. They were rooted in the growing distance between us, in the details he seemed to be slipping up on. I needed answers, but I didn't yet realize the truth would cut far deeper than I was prepared for. I couldn't ignore my instincts any longer. Each passing day, Brant's behavior only deepened the cracks in our marriage. Determined to uncover the truth, I began piecing together his whereabouts and conversations, tracking the subtle inconsistencies that hinted at something far more sinister. What I discovered left me breathless. Brant wasn't meeting an old classmate. He was meeting a woman. The evidence I found, text messages, receipts from intimate dinners, and even photos, painted a picture I couldn't deny. My husband was having an affair. The confrontation happened late one evening. Brant walked through the door, exhausted but unsuspecting. I sat at the kitchen table, the evidence laid out before me like a trial exhibit. "Brant," I began, my voice steady but cold, "you've been having an affair." His face drained of color as his eyes flicked to the damning evidence. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. Instead, his expression twisted into something I hadn't expected: defensiveness. "It's not my fault," he snapped, his voice rising with anger. "You were always too busy with work. You neglected me. You're to blame for this too." For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My chest tightened, a bitter laugh bubbling in my throat. "You're blaming me?" I said, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and fury. Brant glared at me, as if I was the one who had wronged him. But his excuses only fueled my anger. "No, Brant. You're the one who chose to betray me. You could have talked to me. We could have worked through things, but you didn't. You made this choice. And now it's over." I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "Sign these," I said, sliding the divorce documents across the table. Brant stared at them as if they were written in a language he didn't understand. This is a joke, right? You can't be serious," he stammered, his voice cracking. I didn't flinch. "No joke. Sign the papers, Brant." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, with trembling hands, he picked up the papers, but he didn't sign them right away. Instead, he looked at me with desperation. "Please," he said softly, "don't tell my mother." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Even now, his priority wasn't our broken marriage or the pain he'd caused. It was his mother's opinion. The next few days passed in a blur of legalities and finality. Brant clung to the hope that I would change my mind, but he didn't realize the truth. I had already let go of him long before this moment. The emotional distance he had created with his betrayal had left me with nothing to hold on to. As I packed away the remnants of our life together, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't the one who had failed this marriage. I was simply the one strong enough to end it. The moment I uncovered Brant's betrayal, my love for him vanished. It didn't fade slowly or linger in the corners of my heart. It simply evaporated. I was done. No more second-guessing, no more attempts to fix something irreparably broken. My focus shifted to Tyler, our son, and the life I needed to rebuild for us. But Brant wasn't the only one to blame. His mother, Helena, had played a role in this chaos, whether she admitted it or not. Her actions, stealing my black card, enabling Brant's irresponsibility, and treating me like an ATM, were part of a larger pattern of entitlement that ran deep in their family. When I called Helena to break the news of the divorce, her reaction was exactly as I had expected. Over-the-top dramatics. "How could you do this?" she cried, her voice rising with indignation. "You're breaking up our family without even consulting me." I took a deep breath, my tone firm but calm. "There's no need for family consent to get a divorce, Helena," I replied, refusing to indulge her theatrics. She huffed, clearly annoyed, but quickly pivoted. "I'll be fine," she said with exaggerated martyrdom. "But what about the Hawaii trip? You're still paying for it, right?" Her audacity stunned me, but it also made everything fall into place. This wasn't just about Brant's affair or the stolen black card. It was about control, Helena's need to manipulate everything and everyone around her, including me. "I'm not paying for anything, Helena," I said coldly. "That's your mess to deal with." As I started packing and preparing to move out, an unexpected call came from Helena. Her voice was frantic, and I could hear chaos in the background. "Why did you cancel the card?" she demanded, her tone laced with panic. "I had to, Helena," I replied. "I saw you snooping on my pin at dinner, and I realized you had taken the card. What did you expect me to do?" The conversation spiraled quickly. Helena admitted she had been at the travel agency trying to finalize the extravagant Hawaii trip. But her plan had hit a wall. "There's a charge of $220,000 on your card, and it can't be processed," the voice of the travel agent echoed in the background of the call. I froze. $220,000? The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. "What have you done, Helena?" I asked, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You're ruining everything," she snapped, her desperation clear. "I was planning a trip for the family." Her entitlement was staggering, but I stood my ground. "Helena, this is your problem now. You made this mess, you can deal with the fallout." The call ended with Helena fumbling for excuses, her family in the background urging her to fix the situation. But I was done playing their games. I had severed my ties emotionally and was ready to move forward, leaving the toxicity of their entitlement behind. Or so I thought. Just as I started to feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, the sound of the front door slamming jolted me out of my thoughts. The door flew open with a force that made my heart race, and there she was, Helena, her face flushed with fury. She stormed into the room, her voice sharp and demanding. "You need to pay the $220,000 for the trip," she barked, her words laced with entitlement. I stood my ground, the weight of her audacity fueling my anger. "Why should I pay for your travel expenses?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. "Brant and I are divorced. We're legally strangers now. You need to understand that." For a moment, she froze. Her expression shifted from outrage to disbelief as the reality of my words sank in. Her usual commanding presence faltered, replaced by a pale, almost vulnerable look. "If you think I'm still part of this family, you're wrong," I continued, each word cutting like a knife. "We're done." Helena's response was swift, but it lacked its usual bite. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice trembling with frustration. "You don't know what you're walking away from." But I wasn't worried. I had already made my decision. It was over, not just with Brant but with his entire family. I refused to be their punching bag any longer. As I packed the last of my belongings, Tyler stood by my side. His young face was resolute, his words clear and unwavering. "I'm going with Mom," he said, his voice steady. The weight of his declaration hit me hard. In that moment, I realized how much he had been watching, absorbing, and understanding. He didn't want to stay with his father or grandmother. He wanted to leave the toxicity behind as much as I did. Brant's affair, Helena's manipulation, they no longer mattered. Tyler and I had each other, and that was enough. Helena's attempts to guilt-trip me were fruitless. She threw words like daggers, hoping one might land, but I was untouchable now. Her pleas, her anger, even her tears, they meant nothing. Tyler and I walked out of that house, leaving behind the weight of betrayal, entitlement, and manipulation. Brant and his mother were left to deal with the fallout of their actions, their web of lies unraveling without me as their scapegoat. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: I was free. For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed deeply, the air tasting sweeter than I remembered. Freedom wasn't just an abstract concept, it was tangible, and it was mine. Tyler and I were starting over, and no matter how uncertain the path ahead might be, we had each other. And that was all we needed.